Today, my guest, Kelley Coleman, shares that to parents, you will feel better, that feeling of being inadequate or that feeling of overwhelm when your child is diagnosed with a disability and maybe something that you're not sure about, that you will feel better in the future because of the love that you have for your child. I had an amazing time today talking with Kelley Coleman. She is just a bright spot in the field of disability. She is parenting two children with her husband in California, and she has written a really helpful book called Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Supports. I think it's really important here on the Autism Outreach podcast to talk about professional types of journal articles and concerns in the field and hot topics, but I also really love to have on autistic individuals, people with a disability, and also parents who are part of the autism world and world of disability to share their lived experience. And Kelley is very real world, and this book that she wrote is a really helpful guide. She has practical information because the process is very overwhelming. And the one thing that she shares is to start with one thing. Start with one thing and accomplish that one thing. She is really positive and has a lot of great information to share. I'm excited for you to dig into this episode. And as a reminder, if you love the Autism Outreach podcast, we are nearing almost 200 episodes. I can't even believe it. I started this podcast on a snow day a couple Decembers ago in my walk-in closet. If you love the podcast, make sure that you write a review on the Apple Podcast app because that helps other people in the world we are listened to worldwide know that this is a show that they should care about. I will quit talking now. Let's get into my conversation with Kelley Coleman.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
We have a wonderful show for you today. I am talking with Kelley Coleman, and I am very excited to learn more about you. You wrote a book, which is just amazing to me. I don't know if that's really on my bucket list. I think maybe it used to be, but I'm so busy. I really don't know how you did this. It was very exciting to read through it. So I'm excited to share about you, your journey, because it's so impactful for what we do as professionals and for parents that are listening. So for those of us that are new to you, Kelley, can you tell us just a little bit about you and then kind of your journey into this world of disability?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just nerdily excited about your podcast and talking to you and your audience. So as you said, my name is Kelley Coleman, and most of my career and before kids, I got paid to come up with ideas for talking animal movies, which is a ridiculous but awesome job. Yeah. And I have another ridiculous and awesome job now, which is not just being an author, but also parenting two amazing humans. Our boys are now 10 and 12 years old. Our 12-year-old is in a rock band and does magic and plays the tuba and all kinds of unique things. Our 10-year-old is equally unique in all his own ways. In addition to his love for airplanes and swimming pools and saying hi to every single person at Trader Joe's. Aaron, our younger guy, has multiple disabilities, including autism. He has a yet undiagnosed genetic syndrome that is the big umbrella under which all of the other diagnoses fall, including, as I mentioned, autism, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, cortical vision impairment, microcephaly, feeding tube, gross motor, fine motor, sensory, behavioral, cognitive. Like he is just an overachiever, and he's like, I'm just going to keep checking boxes. And we're like, okay, this gives us information as to what your syndrome might be, though you might be the only person in the world. We don't know. So my journey to writing this book, it's called Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Supports. Mm-hmm. And it's how to actually do the stuff. And by the stuff, I mean the paperwork and the planning. Yeah. And all of this stuff that gets thrown onto our laps when we have a child who is disabled in addition to the mental, the emotional that comes with any parenting, plus the added disability, things to figure out. And I basically wrote the book that I desperately needed a decade ago to have, the personal stories, and it's conversational, and it's not like a yucky homework and eat your broccoli, but it's written by someone who got paid to write talking animal movies.
So it's good. It's an easy read. I mean, like when I was reading through it, and I saw some, I know we'll get to the experts you have in there, but Nikki McRory, she was on my podcast. She's also duly certified as a SLP BCBA. I know you're out in California, which has a whole thing too for services. But I think it's nice to have, I like to have parents and professionals on the podcast, because if you're on social media, parents will get completely a lot of negative comments if they ever say anything like it's hard to parent a child who has a disability. And I think that's such a disservice to parents, because parenting's so hard as is. But the thing with the disability is, like, you're probably, all the stuff that you wrote about is all stuff that was new to you. And I'm sure that was extremely overwhelming, because you're trying to find out what's going on with your son with a yet undiagnosed genetic disorder, whatever it is, taking him to all these appointments. And the last thing you need is somebody to say something mean to you online. So I try to have parents on to let them tell their journey, because that's just the truth of it. Is a lot of people, if they get into like a general Facebook group, especially autism, I don't know why that is, they just get so many negative comments if they ask about the wrong thing. Have you seen that happen too?
I love that you asked about the negativity and what gets thrown at parents, because boy, that does happen, and it happens a lot. And it puts parents on the defensive when we're already inside like, man, I am so inadequately prepared for all the things. And I think the challenge is that, and I think the autism community is a great example of this, is on one hand, there are so many parents who are starting from ground zero in their education of all things neurodiversity, paperwork, GI doctors, like whatever it is. On the other hand, we have these incredible and articulate, and thank goodness they're putting themselves out there so the rest of us can learn, these self-advocates, including adults and parents who have not been diagnosed until their adulthood, and they're feeling like, oh, this is me, and I am diving into this because this is part of my identity. And you have two sides that so much want to be heard that they're not always listening to the other side. And we end up working at cross purposes. And one of my interviews for the book, there are over 40 experts in here. It is intentionally diverse and not only disability positive, but approximately a quarter of adults in the US are disabled. I wanted to have at least that and more reflected in my book, demographic wise. And that was a question I asked disabled adults, not just autistic adults, but adults with many different disabilities who are leading on very high levels. And, and by the way, sometimes that high level is an awesome Facebook page. Sometimes it's a multi-time White House appointee, and I'm now a giant foundation. And I sheepishly asked, like, is that okay to say this is hard? And the people who have really kind of sat in their own identity as a disabled adult consistently were telling me, not only is it okay to talk about, but it is necessary to talk about, and we need to think how we are talking about this. I could yammer about my kids all day. They're amazing. But you know what? Epilepsy's hard. Like, period. Medical, sudden, crazy, like all the things, like that's hard. And I talk about that with my child because I want my children to be able to name what is hard for them. And I make it very clear, you are not hard. Loving you is not hard. Being your mom as just purely a mom, that's not hard. But learning neurology is a little tricky for me. That's not my background. And just talking to disabled adults and leaders and experts, saying it is hard, and them saying, this is their words, it is harder to be disabled than not.
Right.
Not necessarily because of the disability itself, but often because of the social and physical barriers and humans out in the world who make it hard. And what I like to think so many of this debate is underlining this debate is self-advocates saying, don't make this harder for me. Don't make this harder for your kid. So I think how we talk about the hard matters.
Yeah.
And I think if we don't talk about the hard, we are erasing our experience as a parent caregiver, as well as closing the space for disabled individuals to say what is hard for them and for us to learn from that. And I try and approach from a place of, I want to learn from you. I hope you will learn from me. I hope you will correct me when I get it wrong, because I sure will. But try and starting from a place of curiosity about one another and our experience.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love that you were so, now with this book and being able to share your message and your story. And the way that I frame things too is I say, this is my lived experience. I do a lot of trainings and things like that. So people are always just, I don't know, when you're in the online space, everybody has something to say about something. So I like the message that you're spreading, because sometimes you'll see things, online that, autism is a gift and some of that. And I think sometimes it is, or autism is not an illness, which it's not. Your brain is just thinking in a different way, but there can be hurdles. And maybe it's just the world sometimes is not made for somebody who is disabled. And so we have to really advocate for what is just universally good practice for all learners. And so with your son, especially with all the various things that you mentioned, I'm sure you're learning so many things, Kelley, about things you didn't know you were going to learn about. But let me ask you just really quickly, what were some of the signs? Did you know immediately that your son was going to have a disability, I guess, before he was born, or when he, did he have a seizure? Or I think some of those things, parents are always kind of worried, like, what are the signs? And I know that your son has a variety of things, but when did you find out that maybe that he was going to need some support?
So find out and suspect were two different moments in time. As I mentioned, we're still on a diagnostic odyssey. If science comes up with more tests, we'll do those, but we don't know.
Yeah.
I suspected from day one when he was born, mom gut said something is going on.
Yeah.
I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know what it was. No one believed me. I felt very gaslighted by everyone except our pediatrician. Who said, I hear you, and your baby is passing all of the tests. You are answering all of the questions in a way that leads me to believe we have no concerns. However, and she said, which was so valuable, she said, you can come into this office as often as you like. We will always see you. We will never turn you away. We will never tell you that you are bananas and you are making this up. We will always listen. And that is an advantage that not everyone has.
Yeah.
And for the first 3 months of his life, I was in that office very frequently saying, I don't know, but something, to the point when our son was hospitalized for failure to thrive, which is such a weird and awful term. For him, it was failure to eat. So that was more specific.
Oh, how stressful.
Eating next to nothing. He has a feeding tube, which I was horrified when I found out my kid was getting a feeding tube.
Yeah.
They're actually not that big of a deal. They're just a different eating. Anyway. So, we started to accumulate signs and things. An important message that I have for anyone in this world or who knows someone in this world is, if your child or someone you know is at an elevated risk for seizures, if you have more than one lifetime seizure, it is officially epilepsy. If you are at elevated risk for any reason, whether it is genetics, neurological something, head injury, brain injury, trauma. Talk to your doctor about what a seizure might look like.
Yeah.
What you would do if there are precautionary things you can do or have for rescue procedures at home, what the 911 call would look like. Hopefully you will never need any of that.
Right.
But we were told by an renowned epileptologist neurologist who we were seeing at the time that our son will never have seizures. He said, I've seen this. This is not a kid for whom that is on the table. Until we were calling 911 for a seizure at age 4. And fortunately, we're in pretty good shape right now with the epilepsy. But
scary.
Looking at what are the things that your child might be at risk for, that you can prepare yourself for, is a really important part of the journey. With autism, our son exhibited, if you were to go down a checklist, there were boxes he checked, there were boxes he did not check, but there were many very clear boxes he did check. We did not receive an autism diagnosis until quite recently. He's 10 years old. He received the diagnosis when he was 9.
Oh, wow.
And I think that is an important thing to talk about. I think autism is often either totally not noticed or just sort of ignored or just pushed by the wayside when there are other diagnoses involved. I've seen it with friends whose children have cerebral palsy, who have Down syndrome, who have genetic things.
Yeah.
And I believe it's important to certainly seek out that diagnosis if that is available to you. And I know insurance and things can be a mess. But also, even if it is a self-diagnosis and awareness, you are not pushing something onto your child. You are recognizing the fullness of who your child is. And in your podcast, you talk so beautifully and with your different experts about things like communication and comprehension and compassion. And viewing your child through the lens of neurodivergence, autism, whatever the thing is, plus looking at their communication, their comprehension, and your compassion for them with all of this happening can give parents a framework for better understanding their child, regardless of a co-occurring diagnosis. And it can be such a relief when you are viewing the things your child is doing as autistic and communication and saying, oh, just to try and extinguish or fix or whatever that thing, that dancing is awesome that he's doing at the grocery store, the movie theater, or by the record player. And maybe we should all be dancing, and we should certainly find more opportunities for him to do that because he is telling us something and he is regulating and he is doing all of these things that we are now recognizing in such a great way. So I think it is important to look at that as a potential part of a more complete diagnosis and understanding of who your child is.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't think we haven't talked on the podcast yet with almost 200 episodes about that kind of comorbidity of having autism, but then having other things. And you're right, like the other things maybe were more medically urgent, right? To epilepsy and those things that then you're getting this kind of comprehensive view. Well, I'm so excited that you wrote this book. So you do have a lot of these experts that you talk to. And so I'm curious, like, did you seek out, are some of these experts people that are part of your team that is kind of helping to support your son? Or are they people, because I know my one friend, Nikki, she is in California. I don't know if you're in the same area. So I'm like, are these people that are actually part of your son's team and, or just people that you think, you wanted to share their message? I'm just curious about that.
So with the book and with the experts featured throughout and many in every chapter, I did have a small number of those experts in my circle, but as you said, so many of them were individuals who I admired and wanted to share their message. So many, if not most of these experts, I reached out to with a cold phone call or email, and I said, here is what I'm doing. I think it certainly helped the cause that I had a publishing deal with a major publisher in place. So it
Yes.
added some legitimacy. And I had such a clear sense of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to serve our community of parent caregivers of people, of individuals with disabilities. And I say individuals because some of our kids are adults now.
Yeah.
And so many people got back to me. There are plenty of people who didn't respond,
Right.
but so many people got back to me, not only so quickly, but with such a strong and immediate buy-in, because we all know so many parents are handed this diagnosis for their child or themselves even, and basically told to go home, Google, and cry. And that's what we do.
Yeah.
And what a mess that is.
Right.
And if instead a diagnosis could be delivered as this is information,
Right.
and the person giving the information is not assigning their values and, oh, how horrible this is, or congratulations even, but
Right.
they're saying, this is objective information. You will have a lot to learn. And here is a place to start. Here is a handbook for how the heck to call your insurance company and figure out school and all the things. And so it was exciting to talk to very high-level experts, whether it's Harvard physicians or Judy Heumann, who is the mother of the disability rights movement, who's awesome. High-level experts like that, but also high-level importance experts like a home health nurse who can tell you what it feels like for the nurse and how to make this a successful relationship, because boy, you need home nursing.
Yeah.
Nikki McRory, who you mentioned, is someone with whom I do have a personal relationship through a really excellent therapy experience with her center that has lasted over years. But it was really a combination of who do parents need to hear from most at this moment in time.
Yeah, that's nice. And I think your book is very easy to read. It reads as a manual of these are things that, and I can tell that you wrote it from a place of, I wish I would have had this book myself. And so I'm going to write it so I can help other people. When does the book come out? Is it for sale now, or do you know the exact launch date of it?
The launch date of the book is March 12th. If this airs before that, it is available for pre-order at all the book places.
Oh, wonderful.
And there will be plenty of interesting launch events and ongoing activity and things. But really, we all know somebody, and probably many somebodies, who needs this book. Ask your local library to stock this book, especially if you're like, I can't spend the money to buy it, then don't. Email your local library, talk to them, tell them to have this. I'm so passionate about access to information across all demographics, including income levels. And if everyone at every income level in every demographic could start with the same foundation of knowledge, we would be taken more seriously. We would not be gaslighted in the way that many of us are. And we would be able to start with a basis of knowledge that makes us feel something other than totally inadequate, which is how I think too many of us start this journey, myself included.
Yeah, I think that will be nice, because I would imagine that sometimes parents, just based on where you live, because I do a lot of parent coaching and parents sometimes that live internationally too, sometimes they just feel alone in that ability to advocate, because you really have to, just like you said, you had mentioned your concerns to various people, but your pediatrician, thank goodness, was in your corner and things like that. But when you don't have that support, it can just feel really daunting to make something that's already difficult. And I can imagine that's extremely overwhelming. So thank you so much for putting this book into the world. I love it. What is let's end with this. What is one piece, and I know this will be hard, Kelley, because you have a lot of good advice to share. It's in the book, but what is one piece of advice you have for parents who are raising a child with a disability?
This could be hours and hours with the podcast alone. The advice that I have, and I'll sneakily try and break this into two bits. Number one is find one thing where you can start. There are so many things to do. You will never run out of things you could be doing. Find one thing where you believe you will see the fruits of your labor, whether it is my child literally doesn't eat food, so I find a feeding therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is, we have an IEP meeting coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Learn about what goals will drive services that your child will need.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out how the heck your insurance plan works. Whatever that one thing is, start with that. Give yourself the easiest possible victory you can.
Mm-hmm.
And as you are doing all of this and feeling overwhelmed, inadequate, ashamed, grief, guilt, joy, like whatever, all of the things, so many of us feel like we are just in this bottomless pit and we're never going to climb out. And I was in such a messy and emotional mess place
Yeah.
for months and years even.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning of my journey, the one thing I wish someone had said to me is, you will feel better. This feeling of inadequacy and overwhelm and all the things is not forever. I don't know how you'll get there, but most likely you will get there because you love this kid. And because of that, this feeling of all the hard things is not forever. You will feel better. And my great hope is that this book will help people to put those systems in place to feel better so they can do that one thing that gives them a victory and shows them that they're not inadequate and this is figure outable.
Love that. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kelley, for being a bright spot in the field and for coming on today. It was great to chat.
Thank you so much for all that you do. I really appreciate your community.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.